What's happening, Awesemo MLB fans? Good morning. Welcome to the MLB DFS Strategy Show. My name's Terry McBride. Hopefully you know that by now. I'm here with my buddy Chris Pinnell. We are going to go through everything MLB DFS today. We're going through, as everybody hopefully likes, the early afternoon slate first. We're going to take you up through the 6 p.m. games. We're going to take a quick little break to talk about our great sponsor, Prize Picks. If you guys aren't familiar with Prize Picks yet, go over to prizepicks.com, check them out, download them from the Apple Store, Google Store, all those different great app stores. It's a great site. It's all prop-based contests. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. We'll make some picks for it or something like that. But we're going to go up through the 6 o'clock games. There's a weird schedule today. We've got the first game of the LA-New York doubleheader on the FanDuel slate in the afternoon. We've got the second one on the DK slate only in the evening. So we'll be talking about LA-New York twice. That'll be the split point for going into the main slate. We'll start with the DK main slate, but we're going to talk about those two FanDuel 6 o'clock games because FanDuel starts at 6:40 today. A lot of variables in play. Chris, how you doing, buddy? We got all that straight?
What's up, Terry? Looking forward to it. I believe this is our third show together. The other two went pretty well. So looking forward to it again. And like we were talking in pre-show, kind of some funky slates going on today, and there is barely any good pitching options to talk about. So it's going to be a fun one to break down.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit thin on the pitching side. There's a couple spots. I know as I'm going through the list, there's a couple guys, in the afternoon, we get, some of the two premium pitchers matched up against one another. Then we've got maybe one more arm on that slate. And it gets pretty dicey in the evening. So we'll get into all of that, guys. As I said, we're brought to you by Prize Picks. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. That helps us out a ton when you give us a little thumbs up on all these videos. When you subscribe, it helps you find out whenever we're going live with all these crazy shows. The guys just did an hour and change on one basketball game for tonight. Not sure how they did that, but I'm sure it was great. So anytime we go live, you get a little notification. Whenever we give away prizes, have contests, anything like that, you'll get a notification if you're subscribed to us. Free tools and data up on the site today. MLB player projections should be pretty relevant for this slate, and MLB ownership projections. Looks like we're doubling down on free content for baseball today. Not bad. So check that out. Go over to the site at awesemo.com and hit it up for some free content. Chris, we've got the Angels taking on my Yankees. Game got wiped out last night. Looks like the Yanks have Nestor going in the afternoon today, and the Angels made a pivot for this matchup. They're throwing Shohei Ohtani at Nestor here, so it's kind of a duel of two. I don't know if I want to call Nestor an ace, but certainly the Angels ace going up against the nominal ace of the New York Yankees at this point, at least. What do you think of the pitching in this first game, which is only on the FanDuel afternoon slate?
Yeah, so if you're playing on DraftKings today, you're not going to have any access to this game, which is very unfortunate because from all the games today, these are definitely pretty much the two best pitching options going right at each other. So this isn't really a game I'm looking to target bats too much. I'm definitely going to be pretty heavy on the pitching. You have two pitchers that have K rates north of 30% this year. Both have xFIPs in the 2 range. I mean, it's really hard not to like either of these guys. And both teams do have some guys that can strike out quite a bit. The Angels bottom half of the order will strike out quite often. They have one of the higher K rates in the league. And obviously the Yankees, while they do have plenty of power, they do have some guys that can strike out as well. So I think targeting some of these pitchers is definitely a pretty strong way to go because of the lack of good pitching options on this slate.
So for the guys in chat yes, and I totally agree with you on that, Chris, but for the guys in chat who are asking, this is going to be the early slate. The first game of the LA-New York doubleheader is on the FanDuel slate. We're starting there. The next game on the list over there on the side, or maybe it's over there, I'm not sure which way I have to point for that, is Minnesota-Detroit, which is on that DK early slate. So we're doing the early slates first. Just a bit of patience. We're talking about the first game that's up on the FanDuel afternoon slate. So let's dig in with Ohtani and throwing him up against the Yanks on FanDuel. It looks like he's pulling like 25% ownership, 35% strikeout rate, 2.45 xFIP for the season, going up against the Yanks and kind of a depleted version of that lineup. Are you comfy getting to around 25% around the field on Ohtani at 10-4, or are you looking to maybe get under that? How would you handle that on FanDuel?
I'm usually a sucker for Ohtani every single time he's on the mound, just because I'm a huge fan of Ohtani. It's very fun to watch him pitch, but he's also really good as well. And plus, this Yankees lineup, it's not that impressive. Like anytime you have Matt Carpenter leading off, I know he's had a couple of home runs recently, but I'm still like, it's a lot better than having to go up against like a DJ LeMahieu up top. And then you had Giancarlo Stanton back in the lineup, which he's not today. So obviously you don't have to worry about that. So not really the most imposing Yankees lineup. It's still solid. Obviously you have Aaron Judge in there. You have Anthony Rizzo, DJ LeMahieu's hitting the 5-hole. Gleyber Torres has been playing well, but I think Ohtani definitely deserves the advantage in this matchup, which I usually always give the advantage to elite pitching over solid offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I definitely would be looking to, with very thin pitching overall on that slate. I'd be pretty much digging into that Ohtani shares. 25% typically gets a little, that's like my breaking point for pitching shares most of the time. Although I accidentally got overweight to Robbie Ray and further than that last night. Didn't work out well. So I think I'd be at or about the field. Maybe I'm undercutting by a little bit to spread some shares out at that price, but I do think he's worth it. I do think the matchup is good. Like you said, Matt Carpenter up at the top. I mean, baseball wise, Matt Carpenter died a couple years ago. He's got 2 home runs, like you said. That's totally surprising. I do not expect much from him. So if Ohtani can navigate Judge, Rizzo, Torres, and DJ, really, there's a lot of upside in getting him. What about Nestor on the other side? Are you a believer in what we're seeing out of Nestor? It's kind of the most relevant question with him. I think a lot of people are just waiting for the other shoe to drop and him to turn back into a pumpkin here, but he keeps on doing what he does. He's up the samples at like 146 innings at this point of him being like a 28 to 30% strikeout pitcher going back this year and last year.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't see him really keeping it up. I know last year was solid, and I thought he was going to drop off a bit, but he's been really good, and it's hard to ignore him. We're getting a decent sample size now. I mean, I was kind of using it as a small sample size, and I figured he would regress, but really hasn't been the case. I don't think he's a complete ace level pitcher, but he's been pretty close to it. Like, he's been very good. We know this Angels lineup, there's some strikeouts in here to be had. I mean, looking at their projected lineup today, I mean, we got a 21% K rate up top. Mike Trout striking out 26% of the time. If you look at the bottom of the order, Brandon Marsh at 31%, 29% for Max Stassi, at a little bit of 27% for Velasquez, 20% for Tyler Wade. Like, there's some upside to be had for Nestor Cortes. I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, they're 24th in baseball, the 23.6% collective strikeout rate against lefties. They're good at creating runs. That's the one thing, but Nestor's been so good at suppressing offense this year, keeping hitters off balance with the way that he works that, I'm kind of on his side here. So I think I'd be both sidesing the pitchers. What about the bats? Would you be getting to Angels bats to answer back any Nestor shares? And kind of the same question with the Yanks. Are you looking at any Yanks against Ohtani?
Yeah, I think you can certainly get to some stacks if you're just looking for leverage, because obviously everyone's going to want the pitching in this game, and it's baseball. Anything can happen. And I know Ohtani's been elite, but he's always good for that 1 or 2 blow games a year. But and I remember the one time I rostered Ohtani versus the Yankees last year, and he got absolutely demolished. I don't think he made it out of the first inning, but it's not really a lineup that I want to get to too much for the Yankees. We're talking about 3.5 implied total for both of these teams. Yeah. So it's obviously not going to be something you really want to get to. And plus, the problem when Ohtani is pitching, you can't stack him on the Angels, and that loses a lot of luster for the stack. So I'm going to probably be underweight on both these offenses today.
Yeah, I haven't been getting to the Angels a ton when Ohtani's not in that lineup. I do think it takes just a major piece of the puzzle out as far as the correlated scoring. You do still get the potential for him to knock in a few runs. You don't get his RBIs, but maybe he knocks in like a Taylor Ward and a Juan Lagares from the bottom of the lineup who happen to be on base when he comes up. But I don't think there's enough there to really dive that heavily into the stack. So I'm with you on that. Maybe some Trout one-offs, 20% ownership, though. You're not really getting far away from the field. Ward at 9%. Maybe you get a little something there. 70-ish degree day, kind of muggy and nasty here in the New York area. So not the greatest. It's a decent hitting environment, but it's not like one of those super hot, like 90-degree summer days in Yankee Stadium. So I don't know how the park factors will necessarily influence it. What about the Yanks on the other side as far as like, are you looking primarily at like Judge, Rizzo, Torres, DJ for where you're going for stacks as a 4-man? Are there any other guys you would include from that lineup in a stack?
Yeah, it pretty much has to be those 4 as the main targets. If you want to get weird, you can play Matt Carpenter just because he's leading off and he's only $2,500 over on FanDuel. But man, it does not feel good rostering Matt Carpenter versus Ohtani, because I'm pretty sure Ohtani's going to win that matchup just about 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I have a feeling that that's the case. Carper coming back outside the 2 home runs, 154, 313, 615 slugging is very good. Creating runs 64% better than average in his 16 plate appearances, but also struck out 31% of the time of those. So what's that? Probably 5 strikeouts out of 16. But yeah, it's not the greatest version of this Yankees lineup. I would take shares of Joey Gallo. I would take shares of Aaron Hicks in the 6 and 7 spot, possibly ahead of Carpenter. But with Gallo, he's sitting at 17.4% ownership because he's only 2,400 with all that power in his bat, scuffling through the season. So maybe on ownership, you go to either Hicks or Carpenter there. If you don't care about the ownership, if you've already offset popularity, maybe it's Gallo. But yeah, not the greatest version of my Yankees going up against a prime pitcher. Let's move on to the next one. This one is on both the 4-game FanDuel slate and the 3-game DK early slate, guys. Minnesota Twins going up against the Tigers. Twins have Chris Archer on the mound. He's drawn some popularity on DK for 7,900. Not really sure I understand that. On FanDuel, 6,800, not in no popularity whatsoever. On the other side, the Tigers have Alex Fado on the mound, 6,300, drawing some popularity at 15% on DK. No ownership to speak of on the FanDuel slate. Are you getting to either pitcher? Presumably it will be on DK if you are, but what do you like about these guys?
Not really liking much of these guys. The problem is on DraftKings, it's a 3-game slate because we don't get Cortez or Ohtani. So like I said, the pitching is very, very thin. So I think just to answer your question on why he's getting ownership, it's because there's no options and people see a righty versus Detroit. So they're like, okay, I guess I'll play some Chris Archer because back in the day, he had strikeout upside and he wasn't terrible all the time. But as of right now, so far this season, we're talking about 35 innings. XFIP very close to 5, a sub 20% K rate, about a 10% walk rate, giving up around a 200 ISO, high fly ball rate, 1.6 homers per 9. I know it's a soft-ish matchup versus Detroit, but I would rather stack Detroit than being overweight on Chris Archer today on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. They're pretty low owned at the top. They're in the, the low teens, and then they're thin through the middle around like Cabrera, Spencer Torkelson. Maybe you get a little something out of Cody Clemens if you're feeling frisky. 0 for 7 so far in his major league career, son of Roger. What about Fado going up against Archer on the other side? Would you get to any Fado at 6,300? I don't really think of much of him as a pitcher, but like you said, only 6 options on that DK slate, kind of thin.
Yeah, maybe a sprinkle of Fado, but his numbers are just not also that impressive. I mean, he's got pretty similar numbers to Chris Archer, just a less K rate, below 15% this year. He's been better at not giving up as much power, but not a lot of ground balls, close to a 40% hard contact rate. Not as many homers as Archer, but it's a tougher matchup versus Minnesota because their lineup at least has some decent options. You got Reyes up top, who's been hitting the ball well. Byron Buxton, who, like, I played a lot of Byron Buxton the past couple of weeks, and he's not really doing anything for me. So hopefully that'll change at some point. But you have Kepler, but his price is to the moon on DraftKings. He's up to $5,500, which is actually $500 more than Buxton, which I'm just now seeing, which is very surprising to say. But
yeah,
he does have some pop versus righties, but you got Polanco, Larnack kind of drops off after there. But I mean, I think the Twins are a fine stack to get to in a small slate.
Yeah, for sure. The ownership on Buxton is definitely concerning. 44% on any individual hitter. That's a lot. So you're immediately differentiating your lineup from a big chunk of the field on that DK slate if you just don't play Byron Buxton. Yeah. It's pretty much the same thing on FanDuel. He's 40% over there. I do think it's a spectacular spot in terms of the matchup against Fado, 14% strikeouts, just not a talented pitcher. It's just difficult to get to any of these guys at low ownership. I would maybe take shares of like Trevor Larnach sitting 10% on FanDuel, 13 on DK. Gary on FanDuel, 11%, but he's pulling 16 on the DK slate where you need catchers. I don't think much of the bottom end of the Twins, and the top part is just so popular. It makes it difficult from a DFS perspective, from a game theory perspective, but I do agree. Like, I do want to be there if I can figure it out, especially around Buxton, Kepler, Polanco, and maybe Larnach. So it'll be an interesting exercise in putting it together, trying to get to unique ways. Do you have a favorite bat from the Tiger side? If you're throwing bats, you mentioned wanting to potentially stack against Archer. Do you have a favorite bat? And then, like, who you're looking at to include in that stack?
Yeah, I think Jonathan Scope for some pop hitting in the 3-hole might be a decent way to go. I don't mind Harold Castro, Willie Castro. They're not obviously enticing bats, but I think like a Torkelson and Jonathan Scope are probably the better options to go with. Now, I do want to mention our top stacks tool did get updated. Minnesota is currently is at the top, but like you were mentioning, they're so popular, they are having negative leverage. So that's the one drawback with them. But I mean, they're still a really good stack they get to. And Detroit looks like they actually have the most positive leverage on the slate going against Chris Archer. So it's kind of in line with our thoughts, which is nice to see.
That's kind of interesting. I kind of like that. And, it's reflected in the ownership projections. Like I said, a lot of after Jonathan Scope, who's at 11%, everybody's in the single digits. They're super cheap. So it's easy to get to them and primetime pitching if there actually was any. So yeah, I do think there are good reasons to go to the Tigers here. Eric Haas, maybe a little bit interesting. He's sitting late in the lineup for a home team. So it's never a great spot to go to an 8-hitter from the home team, but he's got a lot of pop in that bat. 381 plate appearances last year, hit 22 homers, 228 ISO, scuffling this year. But what's interesting about him, for 2,100 on FanDuel, 3,200 on DK, you get catcher and outfield eligibility. So you can just move him around the board in interesting ways. So I think Eric Haas is somewhat sneaky over there, pulling single digit ownership, a lot of pop. Like I said, has not come through with it so far this year. Only 2 home runs and 78 plate appearances, but maybe keep an eye on him. Maybe keep an eye on Daz Cameron if you want a speedy wraparound who's also just not done anything yet in his major league career. But yeah, underwhelming, underperforming lineup, but one that I think we do need for DFS DFS purposes today.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the Rays against the Rangers. We've got Corey Kluber going for Tampa, drawing a lot of ownership. Makes a lot of sense. One of the more proven pitchers on that slate. On FanDuel, he's kind of going overlooked. 8,600, only 5% ownership. That's kind of interesting to me going up against this Texas team. Texas is answering back with the southpaw Taylor Hearn, 6,100, pulling around 30% on DK, 66, low single digit ownership on FanDuel. That could be a little bit interesting. He's not really distinguished himself in terms of the strikeouts, but I could maybe grab some of that at low ownership. I do think there are more strikeouts in that kid's arm. They just haven't shown up yet. So what do you think of Kluber to start out with? That significant popularity on DK, but not really very much on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think it deserves to be like a popular SP2 option with Alek Manoah, who we are going to talk about in a little bit. But $8,100 versus Texas, it's not bad. Like, yeah, I know they upgraded their lineup from last year, but it's still nothing you're really going to be overly concerned about it. And Kluber has been very solid. He's a proven veteran. 3.6 xFIP this year, about a 23% K rate, a low walk rate, not giving him much power, not too much hard contact, only a homer allowed per 9. I don't think he's going to have an elite game, but I think he's going to have a good enough game on a 3-game slate. We're at $8,100. If you're playing cash games, I think he's a good option. If you're playing single entry tournaments, I think he kind of slides in quite nicely, and I will have a lot of shares on him. And I think over on FanDuel, you said he was pulling in single digit ownership.
Kluber, yeah, 5.2% at 8,600.
Yeah, I definitely want to be overweight on that. So both sides, I think he's a fantastic option here versus Texas.
Yeah, you're just kind of walking along with the field as the primetime SP2 on this slate. And I totally agree with that. I think it's Manoah Kluber. And, you just kind of maybe book some chalk into your pitching spots and try and win it with bats on that slate. But 5.2%, I do think that's low owned. I am not looking at the updated top pitchers tool, but I imagine that that's showing some positive leverage even on the small 4-game slate. So I would be looking to target that going up against a Rangers lineup that, they've been back and forth a little bit this year. They started out really cold. They've shown some friskiness, but against right-handed pitching overall, 127 ISO is 25th, 24.2% strikeout rate is 24th, and they're still creating runs 9% worse than average. They've gotten a lot better against lefties. They're all in the green in the top half of the league against lefties, still struggling against righties. So I like that spot for Kluber. What about Hearn? 6,100, 30-ish% owned on DK, 66, no real ownership to speak of on FanDuel. Probably the tougher matchup between the two pitchers going up against this Rays lineup. What do you think of Hearn?
Yeah, I still think it's $6,100. You can certainly play him. Like you said, he is going to grab quite a bit of ownership, close to 30% on this slate. But in the top pitcher stool, he's got the third best chance to be a top pitcher. And that's over guys like Chris Archer, Johnny Cueto, who are a little bit more expensive than him. And he's also grabbing some positive leverage. So I think he's definitely someone I want to consider. And if you're looking at the Rays lineup, it's nothing too impressive. Yeah, you have Margot up top and Harold Ramirez, but that doesn't really scare you too much. And the only one guy with big name value in this lineup right now is Randy Arozarena batting cleanup. So outside of that, I think Taylor Hearn at $6,100 on DraftKings. I don't think he's a bad option. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers so far this year, 20% K rate is getting up some pop and hard contact. But again, you got to keep in mind he's dirt cheap and this is a small slate. If he can get you 12 to 15 points and Kluber just doesn't absolutely smash, he'll be sitting pretty.
Yeah, that's it. You don't need him to go out and put up a dominant start, strike out 10 Rays, pitch a complete game shutout, anything like that. We might be looking at a day where 5 innings and a handful of strikeouts is enough to get to where you need to be. And like I said, I was thinking Tampa Bay against the lefty, probably the worst matchup. And it holds up for strikeouts between these two teams. They're sitting at 18.9%, seventh best in baseball in the split against lefties, but they've actually been 5% worse than average by collective WRC plus. Their ISO against lefties is 29th in baseball, 0.091. That's pretty non-Rays like. And they've only hit 4 home runs all year against lefties, a 1.11% home run rate, 29th in baseball. So maybe I'll unwind that a little bit. Maybe Hearn's a little bit safer than I thought. The strikeout upside might not necessarily be there, but I think I like that even a little bit better than I did when we were coming into it. Let's talk on the other side of that equation, though, about some of those Rays bats, because they will be heavily right-handed going up against the lefty. We know they play the platoon game. They've got a number of switch hitters on the team, and they've got a lot of capable righty bats. So I would be interested in like a Harold Ramirez. He's very cheap on both sites. And I really love getting to a guy with a 50% hard hit rate, over 126 plate appearances. He doesn't hit a ton of home runs. He's got only a 0.094 ISO, 2 home runs on the season, but he creates runs 6% better than average. He puts the ball in play like crazy and he hits it hard. 11.1% strikeout rate. He only walks 4.8% of the time. So he's just kind of an engine for offense and for some correlated scoring and potentially for some individual scoring up at the top of that lineup. Against the lefty for cheap, I can get to him. I don't love Manny Margot up there, but I would use him if I need to in Rays stacks. And then Randy Arozarena, like you said, can be in my lineup any day. What else from that lineup outside of those guys are you looking at if you're stacking this team?
Yeah, outside of those guys, it definitely gets a bit tougher because
Yeah.
the numbers do fall off quite a bit. Like the top three guys, they don't strike out at all and they get on base a ton. Randy Arena, why he's not had a ton of power this year versus lefties. The upside is certainly there, but it does fall off a cliff. It's a very small sample size for Mejia, only 15 plate appearances, but he is batting around 500 versus lefties this year with a 230 WRC plus. But it's a very small sample size. But after that, I mean, maybe Mike Zunino for some pop versus the lefty, but other than that,
my guy. Yeah, I would have definitely jumped on the Zunino call there, but he's pulling some ownership. I mean, 15% on DK where you do need catchers, but 2,100 on FanDuel pulling almost 20% ownership where you do not need catchers. That's a surprise. Zunino's on that list of catcher bats that I'll throw into the mix on FanDuel because, you typically get less ownership on them. So maybe you do actually make that pivot where if you're going to roster a catcher from this team, maybe you do go to Mejia if he's in the lineup there. And he had a good year last year, 277 plate appearances, 260, 322, 416, 156 ISO created, runs 8% better than average, 6 home runs. He's not an outstanding offensive player, but for a part-time catcher, those were pretty good numbers. So if he's in the lineup there, switch hitter, I don't mind getting to that at all at the dead minimum on FanDuel, 3,800 on the DK slate. And I think if Isaac Paredes is hitting fifth, I think he's at least somewhat interesting because he's 3,300 multi-position, second base, third base on DK, 2,200 third base only on FanDuel. He's pulling a little ownership on both sites, so I don't love that aspect of it. But again, small slate dynamics, 49 plate appearances, 3 home runs, a 250 ISO for the guy so far this season. Not really like a distinguished player in anyone's mind, and I'm surprised he's pulling as much ownership as he is. But I think I want to be there if he's in the middle of that lineup and I'm going to this team again and again for stacks. So it would probably be like 1 through 7 for me, I think, for the Rays.
Yeah.
What about
I was just going to say 8 and 9 are really not, they're going to be really hard to get to for me.
Yeah. Taylor, even with multi-position, dirt cheap pricing, all that, Taylor Walls, Vidal Brujan, not really showing. So yeah, I'd cut it off around 7. What about the Rangers on the other side? Confirmed lineup for the Rangers, Josh A. Smith leading off, Semien, Cole Calhoun, Mitch Garver. There's a pretty obvious name who's not in that lineup today. Mr. Corey Seager, not in the lineup for the Rangers. What does that do for the Rangers stack in your mind? And what does that do? Does that enhance the nature of the Kluber play on the other side?
Yeah, basically it just makes you want to play Kluber. I mean, will I have some Ranger stack in 150? Sure, but is it going to be a ton? No, it's just going to be trying to get into exposure to everybody in the field because it's such a small slate. If this was like a 13-game main slate, like we saw a couple of days ago, there's a good chance I'd have like 1 to 2% Rangers. And I mean, on this slate, yeah, I'll be a little bit higher than that just to get to maybe some Semien, Cole Calhoun, Mitch Garver because they're decent hitters. But outside of that, it's going to be very Kluber heavy for me.
Yeah, and they're in an interesting spot, right? They're in that part of the board where I think that Kluber's going to get them. They're pulling some ownership, but it's not atrocious for a small slate. So I might get pulled into a few more shares just through the sheer virtue of process where just some of the lower owned players and stacks will get floated to the top in my sort and everything. So I would suspect that I might get more Rangers than I would deliberately go for, and it could work out. You're attacking a lot of ownership on Kluber if you're doing it on DK. You don't get that luxury on FanDuel, which I don't like about the play on FanDuel. If I was throwing these bats at 25% owned Kluber on FanDuel, I'd be a lot more enthusiastic about it. But I agree, it's kind of an underperforming team in general. It's not the best version of their lineup, so I don't know how excited I'd be if I did come up with a big share of Rangers there. It's weird. They've typically performed when I haven't wanted to be on them and not perform when I've gotten there. So it's not a team I've gotten right all that often this year. I might just kind of go along around the fields numbers and being like that mid-teens on some of the individuals, maybe try and get over on like a Nate Lowe, a Jonah Heim, some of the weirdo hitters who aren't really pulling a ton of ownership there at fair prices in decent spots in the lineup. Like Heim gives you a decent amount of pop, 6 home runs in 122 plate appearances, 40.9% hard hit, only 5.1% owned at 3,500 as a catcher on DK. That's not bad. Everybody else going to Mitch Garver 1 spot ahead of him in the lineup. If you just make that pivot in the lineup, that's not bad. And you're not sacrificing all that much power. So I think there are ways to put them together, but yeah, I'm not the most enthusiastic about it. Let's move on. Last game on deck for this early slate. We've got the White Sox going up against the Blue Jays. White Sox with Johnny Cueto on the mounds, the reanimated corpse of Johnny Cueto anyway, taking on Alek Manoah, who I think we both agree is the top pitcher on this DK3 gamer. Manoah pulling a 77% ownership share on DK at 9,000. Johnny Cueto pulling 10.9 at 8,400. On FanDuel, Manoah owned at 20% for 10.9. That's pretty fair, I think. So let's talk about that DK ownership because I think that's the most important talking point here. Does it make sense to go to the field's level at that much ownership? Let's call it 80% for 9,000. Does it make sense? Or are you trying to look and come in 65%, 60%, or are you just going to the field, or are you potentially just locking Manoah here?
This might be a situation where I lock, because you got to look at it two ways. Like, yes, you don't want to always just be even with the field, but at the same time, we don't have many great pitching options on the site. Like, instead of being overweight on Johnny Cueto, I'd rather just almost be almost all the way on Alek Manoah, just because I believe in the talent. And maybe it's not the best matchup in the world versus the White Sox, but at the same time, it's not a great matchup for the White Sox either. Manoah, we know he's got the talent. He has some major negative leverage, though, in the top pitchers tool, negative 30% right now. But you got to keep in mind, it's just because of that massive ownership. And I'd say more likely than not that he works out and is probably in the optimal lineup if you were playing in tournaments over on DraftKings for the other slate. So I don't even mind just locking in Manoah. He's got the talent. It's a little scary to do to lock in a pitcher because, a couple home runs can certainly end your day quickly. But I would try to be at least even to the field and maybe slightly overweight.
I think I would probably move away from the idea of the full lock, because just looking at their ownership numbers in the low to mid single digits, I think I'm going to want to have some White Sox shares attacking a 77, 80% owned pitcher, right? Like, I think grabbing just some of that contrarian play makes some sense from a game theory perspective, where I'll sacrifice 15% of the public's Manoah shares and drop from 80% to 65, and then just throw those lineups at the White Sox bats and see if I can grab a little edge against the field there. I think that's the approach I would take on DK. It's a really different situation on FanDuel. You do get the low on White Sox situation on FanDuel, but at a 20% ownership, it's not nearly attacking as much of the field as you would be on DK. If you can wipe out all but a fifth of the field by grabbing the bats against a pitcher like that, I think that's worth the gamble. So I think I would be looking to do that, maybe getting into some shares of at least the top end of the projected White Sox lineup, not necessarily the whole thing. I would still definitely be very heavy on Manoah. I do agree he is the best pitcher on this DK slate. And then outside of the guys in the Angels versus Yankees game on the FanDuel slate, he's number 3. 23.7% strikeout rate, not walking anybody. A 0.91 whip is fantastic. So I expect Manoah to succeed. I expect him to be the highest scoring DraftKings pitcher. But in the event that he's not, I want to be on the bats that damage his day. So I think I would go that route with it. But I don't think you're necessarily wrong for saying just lock him in and take the points and say thank you very much, right? Because he's very, very probable on this slate. Yeah. Would you get to any Johnny Cueto here at all against the Blue Jays? Do you believe in anything that we've seen from Cueto? 4.06 xFIP, not giving up a home run. Strikeout's not really there, but pitching okay.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, if you're looking at the top pitcher stool, he actually is our most positive leverage pitcher. At the same time, though, it doesn't feel great playing Cueto. First, the Toronto Blue Jays with obviously the power that they have, but maybe a sprinkle of Cueto. But outside of that, I'd much rather get to the bats here. I mean, Springer, Bichette, Vlad finally went deep last night. Task Hernandez, Alejandro Kirk. If it was either last night or the day before where he went double down, but we know he's got plenty of pop in his bat. The bottom of the order does trail off a little bit, but I mean, the Blue Jays bats have to look pretty good. Highest implied run total on the slate as well.
Yeah, I think I'd be leaning much more into that side of this. I'm not a believer in anything about Johnny Cueto. I think it's just he's a placeholder in that rotation right now. I know they DFA'd Keuchel in favor of him, but it's just nothing that you believe about Johnny Cueto. If you think he's good, is real, and he is very, very flawed. He hasn't been good since like 2016. I would be looking at Blue Jays bats. I agree with everything you said there. What about on the White Sox side? Like for me, if I am making that play against the Manoah ownership, I'm looking at like Yasmani Grandal, Andrew Vaughn, Jose Abreu, Luis Robert, John Moncada, if he's back in the lineup, AJ Pollock, and then maybe it cuts off. I would maybe sprinkle in some Gavin Sheets shares, but even that I think is asking a lot. I don't need that much Larry Garcia or Danny Mendick in my life. Are you looking primarily at the top end guys, or can you make an argument for the bottom 3?
Yeah, it's pretty much going to be the top. I mean, we know Grandal's got some pop. I mean, so far this year, he hasn't really been showing it, though, at 0.05 ISO. But and a 49 WRC plus. I mean, at some point, it's going to come back a little bit, but it's definitely not been pretty this year. But he is leading off. Andrew Vaughn, he's got over 200 ISO this year, 155 for Jose Abreu. He went deep yesterday, 153 for Luis Robert, Moncada. So, like you said, assuming if he's in the lineup. Gavin Sheets is fine because he's got pop versus righties, but I mean, outside of that, it's going to be pretty scarce for me on the White Sox side, even though there are some good bats here, but I am a believer in Manoah.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I've gotten burnt stacking against Manoah in the past, so it would be just primarily that that contrarian play attacking that ownership. I do think AJ Pollock still 3,400 is too cheap for his talent on DK. 2,500 definitely too cheap for him on FanDuel, and this time around not drawing any popularity because he's going up against Manoah here. So I think that's just kind of an interesting spot to get to if you're looking at White Sox. If you're looking for just an outfield one-off and you don't have Manoah in that lineup, maybe you grab some cheap Pollock for some upside. Very talented player. Anything to say about the Blue Jays side of this one that you didn't say in that rundown before?
No, pretty much just loading up on all the bats for the most part. Maybe kind of low on the bottom three, but I mean, that's a given.
Yeah, I would take maybe a couple shares of Kevin Biggio as a wraparound if he ends up hitting ninth for super cheap. I still believe in that talent. Hasn't really shown us anything, but against Johnny Cueto here, lefty, I'll take some multi-position Kevin Biggio for cheap if I need him. So, all right, let's move on from that. We'll take care of some business real quick. Then we'll do the 2 6 o'clock games. Then we'll talk about our sponsor Prize Picks, and then we'll go into the rest of the main slate. First off, you guys are here for baseball, so presumably you're a subscriber at the site, or at least know that we offer baseball subscriptions. If you want to get an Awesemo Plus MLB package, those are as low as $18.95 a week. That includes all of our projections, our tools like the top stacks, the top pitchers, everything baseball that we talk about on these shows. But the real deal at the site, guys, is the Platinum plan. If you're planning on playing one MMA weekend, one PGA weekend during the summer, it just makes sense to look at the Platinum because it includes every single sport that we cover. So you don't even have to plan ahead. If you just on a whim say, hey, you know what? I want to play that NASCAR race today. Well, you've got the projections, you've got the tools, you've got the top drivers, all the different tools and content that you need. We're running a promo for that. 50% off your first month of Awesemo Platinum if you use promo code MLB Strategy Show. The name of this show, all in caps, all one word, MLB Strategy Show. 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. It does not include Fantasy Cruncher. That's always going to be a paid add-on, guys. They're a separate company. We love them. They're a great value add. We highly recommend them, but it's always a paid add-on. Start winning. Stop guessing. Start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. We look forward to seeing you guys around the site. Let's jump into the 6 o'clock hour. We've got probably a little catching up to do if we're actually looking to do an hour show. We'll see how we do on that. We've got the San Francisco Giants taking on the Miami Marlins. This game is on the FanDuel main slate, which starts at 6:40. It is not on the DK main slate. Neither is the next one. They're running a little 2-gamer turbo for that. I didn't even look at it. I don't have any data for it. But if you're playing that, just listen up for what we're talking about on the FanDuel side. Giants, Alex Wood, the lefty, going up against the Marlins. Marlins answering back with Sandy Alcantara. Very good pitchers on both sides of this one. What do you want to do with Alex Wood for a fairly good price, 7,400 on FanDuel, drawing a lot of attention?
Yeah, I definitely think you should get to some Alex Wood here. I mean, he's been very good this season, a 3.1 xFIP, 24% K rate, not allowing any fly balls, not allowing any hard contact. Typical Alex Wood stuff. I think it's a fine spot versus Miami. I'm pretty comfortable getting to a good amount of Alex Wood today for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes sense. 7,400, just too cheap for him. 23.7% strikeout rate, 6.8% walks. You mentioned the xFIP. He's putting a few too many guys on base, but it looks like it's mostly going to be via batting average on balls in play. A 1.47 whip doesn't totally jibe with the 6.8% walks to me. So probably a little happenstance in that whip. But I think he's a capable pitcher going up against a Marlins lineup that has some right-handed pop for sure. They're going to be almost entirely right-handed tonight going up against him. But I think he's capable enough. I just wish he was lower owned. Like this Marlins team, 29.6% strikeout rate against lefties is dead last in baseball. 27th ranked ISO, 68 WRC plus is dead last. It's a good spot to throw lefties at. I just don't love that ownership on him. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to navigate that. I would probably come in around like the 15, 18% range against the 30 on FanDuel. What about Sandy on the other side? He's been dynamite this season, 24% strikeouts. I'll let you talk about it, but what are you doing with Sandy? He's only pulling 13% ownership, but he costs 11,000.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the top pitcher still for FanDuel, he is popping up as the best guy to be the best, the top one pitcher on the entire slate. And I totally understand that. I mean, the only problem is he's very expensive, but he has been very strong this year. 3.5 xFIP, 24% K rate, not allowing any power whatsoever. His ISO is just around 100 this year. Lots of ground balls, 25% hard contact rate, half a homer allowed per 9. And also, I believe the lowest implied run total on the slate, it's like at 3.3 right now. It's at least one of the lowest, and it's a fine place to pitch, obviously. I don't really have much interest in any of the Giants bats here, so I would definitely rather be on the Sandy side than I would for San Francisco.
Okay. So I was going to ask if there's any concerns about those Giants bats because they've been good against both hands this season. 119 WRC plus against righties, a 3.45% home run rate, a 176 ISO, all top 6 marks in the league. Their 20% strikeout rate, also top 6. I don't know that I agree. I think I agree with you. I don't know that that leads me to any Giants bats necessarily. They are very low owned, but it's not like Alcantara is drawing, 40% ownership here. So I think I'm probably going to spread out, not attack a very good pitcher. I might have a couple shares. Are there any individual hitters? Because they'll go fairly heavily lefty against the righty. Are there any individual hitters from San Francisco that you would take as a one-off or maybe in small doses as stacks?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of guys that could give him some trouble. The one thing is he just doesn't allow much power, but guys like John Peterson batting cleanup, obviously he can crush right-handed pitching. You have Tommy La Stella, Mike Yastrzemski, Brandon Crawford, but outside of that, I don't like maybe a mini stack or one off here in the lineups that you don't have Sandy. And I'm not going to have a ton of Sandy. Like I do like him, but at the same time, he's very expensive. So I would obviously have a lot more of other, pitchers to try to get my more flexibility in my lineups. So at the same time, like, yes, I like him, but you also have to keep in mind his price point, which is massively expensive. But, guys like just some of the lefties up top, I think could give him some trouble, but I'm not too concerned about it.
Yeah, those are the guys I'd be looking at, primarily Jock Peterson, maybe some Yaz. The guy that I wouldn't sleep on is Luis Gonzalez. If he's hitting in like that 6-7 range, 2,900, having a very nice year, the young kid, 337, 374, 471, creating runs 39% better than average. Not the biggest power hitter, but a nice correlated scoring option from the left side of the plate. So I'd be looking to him. But yeah, again, it's going to be very limited in terms of the amount that I get there. Excuse me. One of the primary ways to potentially get to that price for Alcantara is by going to some of the Marlins bats. They're all very cheap. They're going to be very right-handed. You do have hitters that are good against lefties historically, like Jorge Soler, like Avi Garcia in the middle of the lineup with some power. Jesus Aguilar hits from the right side of the plate. There's some good hitters in there, but no Jazz Chisholm in the projected lineup. There's just a flawed version of this lineup. So would you get to any of them just to kind of create the utility to be able to get to shares of Sandy, or are you just kind of bypassing the Marlins here where they struggle against lefties?
Yeah, I mean, the slates, if this was the smallest slate, I would think I maybe get to some of the Miami bats on such a larger slate, maybe a couple percentages of Miami stacks, just because Alex Wood's going to have a ton of ownership. Like it's like for a FanDuel, obviously you only pick one pitcher. So I think 34% projected ownership is pretty high for a single pitcher. So he also has a ton of negative leverage. So I wouldn't mind maybe some Miami stacks because as of right now, the projected lineup is a full on righty. So yeah, maybe a little bit, but I'm not in love with it.
Yeah. I think Avi Garcia and Jorge Soler would be my go-tos there. And I'm with you. I'm not in love with it, but I do think, it is probably worthwhile grabbing some shares just to attack that 30+% ownership on Wood. So that's a good call. I do think that makes some sense. So maybe some, minor hedge stacks. Let's take a look at the Nats against the Reds, the next game in that 6:00 hour. Make sure I have that correct. And the FanDuel slate. Oh, I'll answer a couple questions that Larry C just dropped in the chat real quick here. That is, okay. I had them reverse order. That's the Nats, then Reds next. So Larry C asked, ever wonder if Tim McBee knows all these stats off the top of his head? No, I do not, pal. I can typically get to this guy's good, that guy's bad, this guy's pitching around this, he's lefty, he's righty, all that stuff is in there. But I've got my big model has a whole huge dashboard that pops up both teams, the pitchers, a bunch of different stats that I've got in there. Larry C also asks, on the early slate, 2 hitters versus a pitcher, okay. On the 3 game, I think that's all right. It's not my favorite thing to do still in any circumstance, but 3 game is my line in the sand where I'll say, all right, 3 games, I will allow a hitter or 2 against my pitcher. So I'm all right with it, particularly on that 3 game DK slate. I don't think I would do it on the 4 game early slate on FanDuel. I think there's enough spots over there. So hopefully that answers the question there for Lar, one of our regulars and a great guy in the chat. Let's move on. Nationals with Juan Adon on the hill, taking on the Cincinnati Reds with something called Graham Ashcraft on the mound in Cincinnati. Big total in this one. Looks like the ballpark factors are going to be coming into play here with the weather heating up in Cincinnati. So let's talk about the pitchers. Are you getting to any shares of Adon? Or are you getting to any shares of Ashcraft?
I'm not going to try to. I mean, maybe if they pop up in a couple lineups, but outside of that, I am mainly trying to get some offenses here. Both these pitchers, if you look at their numbers this year, it's a smaller sample size for Ashcraft, but it's not been good so far in a small sample size. He's not giving up power and getting a lot of ground balls, but also a sub 10% K rate and a 5 exit. But if you're looking for a Adon, an XFIP north of 5, a sub 20% K rate and a 13% walk rate and giving up some pop. So this is definitely a pretty good spot for offenses. Obviously, we're in a very hitter-friendly park in Great American Small Park. We have a 5.5 implied run total for the Reds and close to 5 for the Nationals. And these are usually 2 offenses you don't want to target too much. So it's definitely getting a lot of love over in Vegas, which I think might be deserved.
Yeah, and just do not want to tangle with either of these pitchers with that total in this ballpark. Even with, the teams, the offenses that they're facing, I just don't believe in a guy with a 17% strikeout rate and a 12.9% walk rate in Adon. Ashcraft, 8.9% strikeout rate, 4.8% swinging strike rate, giving Zach Greinke a run for his money. No thanks. Let's talk about the bats. Are you getting to any Nationals, Cesar Hernandez, Keibert Ruiz, Juan Soto, Nelson Cruz, Josh Bell type of hitters? Do you get frisky with the bottom of that lineup? What do you do with the Nats here?
I mean, I think Soto's got to be one of the top targets on the entire slate. I mean, we have an implied run total over 5, or close to 5, which is pretty good for the Nationals because usually they're not nearly that high. Yeah. And he's sub 4K over on FanDuel going up against Ashcraft. I mean, it's a really good spot for him. Josh Bell's got some pop versus righties. Outside of that, I mean, obviously it's not a super imposing lineup. Nelson Cruz is fine batting cleanup, but I mean, those are definitely like the meat of the order is the one I want to target the most there.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. I typically do not get to much of the bottom end of this lineup at all for the Nats. So it cuts off for me. I can include Yadiel, and it cuts off around 6 for me. I don't think I've rostered a share of Michael Franco this year. Victor Robles, I think we know what he is from the bottom. He was formerly like a 15-30 type guy, type prospect, 15 home run, 30 stolen bases type prospect in a lot of people's minds, and just has not panned out at the major league level. A little bit frisky with a home run last week, 5 stolen bases so far, but I don't think we need to get there. On the other side of this one, the Reds, they've been a weird team. They came out of the gate tragically bad, and they've improved somewhat. Maybe a little bit of interest in like a Nick Senzel, Brandon Drury, Tommy Pham, Joey Votto for me. What about the rest of that lineup? And are you getting to any of the top end? Would you be rostering Reds here against the Don?
I think you should. I mean, they have one of the higher implied run totals on the slate. And obviously these guys are not that expensive. So there's a lot of value to be had. And if you are rostering a lot of Sandy, I think a lot of in those Sandy lineups, you get to a lot of Reds because it kind of meshes quite well.
Yep.
But it's just not many great names here. You have Tommy Pham, but I think he's more worried about fantasy football right now than baseball. But he's been solid in times this year, $3,000 if he's going to be batting third. But I know he hasn't been in the lineup for quite some time right now. Joey Votto batting cleanup's only $2,500. Tyler Stevenson's one of the better hitting catchers, $3,200. You could look at some Moustakas batting 7th, but man, Albert Almaro and Matt Reynolds are really not guys I want to try to get too much. So I'm going to maybe cut it off after 7 with Moustakas.
Yeah, and Moose hasn't exactly distinguished himself over the last 2 seasons. 206 plate appearances, only 6 home runs last year, 30% worse than average by WRC plus. This year, slashing 210, 317, 328, 16% worse than average with only 3 home runs and 139 opportunities. So, yeah, I don't even know how much Moose I really need. And I tell you what, they're drawing a ton of ownership up top. They're getting 20% range down to 40% on Joey Votto. They are a good value stack. Like if you're going to pay for Sandy, that is one pathway to doing it. Yeah. But if you can find any other path to paying for Sandy, I think it might be better just given that weight of ownership on this team. Like even the Nationals on the other side, Soto's only 3,800, Nelson's 3,000. There's enough value there that you can maybe go to that same ballpark, similarly high total, and you're at least cutting the ownership down by half on most of those players. So maybe that's the move. I don't love the popularity for, not great lineups on either side of this one, but it'll be interesting to see how it comes out in crunches. Let's talk real quick about Prize Picks, you guys. Our great sponsor. We mentioned them a couple times. As you guys have heard, it's prop-based contests over there. There's no sharks. There's no optimizers. There's no 150 mass entries that you got to worry about. You're making your prop card, and you're going to win. You're going to lose on your own. You're not worried about what Alex is doing. You're not worried about what I'm doing, what Chris is doing. So you build out a 5-player card with player props. You can use your knowledge of multiple sports across entries. So if you like something in basketball tonight, you like a couple home run props. They've got some really cool stuff for baseball too. Combined 3-man home runs for hitting 1 home run across 3 players, stuff like that. Great strikeout props, all sorts of interesting bets. But you can go multi-sport, so you can combine basketball, baseball, hockey, all different picks on the same card. If you hit all 5, you can win up to 10 times your entry fee. Click the link in the video description below. Head over to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app in the App Store or on Google Play. Use promo code Awesemo, all in caps, Awesemo. You guys should know how to spell that by now. You get up to $100 on your first deposit. We'll match up to $100 on the first deposit. Promo code Awesemo, all in caps. We are going to skip over making some Prize Picks picks at this point in the show. We need to pick up a little bit of time. We're going to have some videos up on the site that are making those. So I really encourage everybody, go play on Prize Picks, and maybe we'll see if we can find one as the show goes on. But we're not going to do it right now, so I'll try and work a couple in. But what we need to do now, I need to switch some pitchers here, and we need to make our way back to the Bronx because we've got game 2 of the doubleheader, which is going to be on the DK slate, but not on the FanDuel slate. So let's talk about this one. We have Reed Detmers taking the ball for the Angels, going up against Jameson Taillon for my Yankees. What do you like about Reed Detmers as a lefty in Yankee Stadium going up against this lineup? And then talk to me about Taillon.
Yeah, not a big fan of Detmers here on the season. I know he had that one great game, obviously, but a 4.5 xFIP, a sub 20% K rate. His ISO has been above 200. He's given up a lot of fly balls, 1.6 homers allowed per nine. Obviously, not the best place to pitch in the world. I mean, I know you're missing some guys in the lineup, but I'm still not a huge fan of Detmers here. I'd much rather be on the Taillon side. I know he's a little more expensive at $9,300, but only a 3.3 implied run total against him. And he's been solid this year. He's obviously not going to strike out a ton of guys, but just from a damage control standpoint, he's been pretty good at 3.6 xFIP. 19% K rate, but only a 2.5% walk rate, which is great. I love pitchers that don't get themselves in trouble. I listen to homer allowed per nine, a sub 30% hard contact rate. And like I said earlier, the Angels have plenty of guys that will strike out, especially at the bottom half of the order. So I think Taillon's a fine option. But I do want to mention, as of right now, it looks like there could be some potential weather for the evening games. That is something to look for.
Yeah, it was a weird spot. They had to reschedule last night. It was rainy over here, and they had a kind of an ugly day to work with today. So we'll see what happens with that one. But yeah, we'll need to keep an eye on the weather. We'll definitely also need to keep an eye on just what the makeup of the lineups is going to be for game two here. Looks like they went kind of full bore for game one on both sides. It's basically the standard version of both lineups. It'll be interesting on the Angels side to see if you have Shohei Ohtani back as an offensive option in game two. For the DK slate. So a lot to keep an eye on in this one coming back for game two. Any hitters that you expect to maybe be in lineups that weren't in the day lineups? Any wild cards in there for you on either side?
I'm not sure we'll see any wild cards. I mean, obviously, I think the Yankees are going to switch around a little bit because they're going to go from a righty to a lefty. Yeah. So you're going to see DJ probably leading off, assuming he's still in the lineup, and you're probably going to get Miguel Andar in there. So batting fifth, I think, is a fine option. So yeah.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, those are guys I'd be looking for here. But without lineups, without knowing what's really going to be happening with the weather, I think we kind of want to just kind of breeze through this one. I agree with what you said about the pitchers. Detmers, outside of the no-hitter, has not really shown a ton at the major league level. I don't want to talk too bad about him because he might go out and no-hit my Yankees if I do. Taillon, I'm with you. 6.4% owned on the – oh, no, sorry, that's – he's not on the FanDuel slate. DK only. 9,300, 27% owned. I think that's about right in terms of the price and the ownership. He's just been pitching fairly well, getting through games cleanly while not racking up a ton of strikeouts. And I think there are enough strikeouts on the bone for him here. So let's skip down. We will move on to the next game, the first game that's on both sites' main slate. The Seattle Mariners taking on the Baltimore Orioles once again in renovated Camden Yards. The Mariners, Chris Flexen on the hill, drawing 6,200, at 6,200, drawing 26% popularity against the Orioles, coming off a great start against the Houston Astros, totally unexpected. Do you expect anything from Chris Flexen here? And then would you look at Jordan Lyles at all, also drawing 20+% ownership for 6,700 on the DK slate? Neither pitcher getting attention at all because Flexen costs 8,100 and Jordan Lyles costs 9,000 on FanDuel. Low single-digit ownership for both pitchers over there. Do you have either of these guys in mind for tonight on either side?
On FanDuel, it's going to be a no thank you with those price points. On DraftKings, though, I think, like these are the guys with the definition of mediocre, but there's not that many great pitching options. You have to roster too. So I think they're going to find their way in my lineups just a little bit, just because you're going to kind of have to. Because when we talk about some of the other pitchers on this slate, you're going to be thinking, well, I guess Chris Flexen and Jordan Lyles don't look that bad. Plus, obviously, Camden Yards isn't as much as the hitter's park as it used to be. About a 4.5 implied run total for both these guys. I wouldn't say both offenses are amazing, but Baltimore's been hitting really well recently. So that's some concern I would have for Chris Flexen because I rostered a lot of Robbie Ray last night. I had close to 40% over on FanDuel, and obviously on DraftKings, I had a bit more over there. And it didn't work out too well. I think 21 FanDuel points, 23. It wasn't really what I was looking for. Fortunately, he was high owned, but definitely wasn't pretty. But Chris Flexen, looking at his numbers this year. Yeah, it wasn't fun. 4.7 xFIP for Flexen this year, which isn't great. 17% K rate. Not getting a ton of ground balls, about a homer and a half allowed per nine. I would probably rather be on the Baltimore side with the way they've been hitting recently. But even then, it's just like, it's like the battle of mediocrity here. Now, Jordan Lyles, I'd rather get to Lyles on DraftKings than I would Flexen. He's just been a bit better this year. 3.9 xFIP, 20.5% K rate, not walking as many guys, not giving up a ton of power. So for me, I'd have to side with Lyles, but I'm not excited about either guy.
Yeah, I think if I was playing that DraftKings slate, I might just be looking to spend more money at pitcher today. This value tier is so ugly with both of these guys pulling a lot of ownership in this spot. I agree with what you said. I think the Orioles are more frisky than we've given them credit for. They are, I think, going to end up proving out to be better against lefties than they are against righties. That was true about them last year. There's a lot of good righty bats in that lineup. Eric and I looked at it yesterday. Their numbers against lefties away from Camden Yards were actually pretty good. they were just suffering from that new dimensions in the park for all those right-handed hitters. So it's going to be interesting to watch going up against a righty here. I'm with you. I'd rather be on the bats. They're all pretty low owned, 6.5% through the middle of the lineup there on DK, low single digits on FanDuel. So I'm probably going to be attracted more to the Orioles bats here and more to the Mariners bats on the other side on both sites. So let's talk about those bats. Starting from the Mariners, Jesse Winker up top, Ty France, Julio Rodriguez, JP Crawford, Eugenio Suarez. All those guys can be in my lineup. And then they've got some frisky lefties down toward the bottom. Are you getting to any Mariners stacks? And if so, like who are you targeting?
Yeah, I'll definitely get to some Mariners stack. I was looking at the top stacks tool, and they were a little bit higher than what I thought. I think they're coming in as the third best stack on the main slate as of right now, as far as their optimal percentages. So definitely gives me some confidence in them. I'll definitely get to some Jesse Winker, although he's been pretty disappointing for me over the course of the season. But I mean, only batting .213 with a less than a 100 ISO, which is a complete drop off of what he did in Cincinnati, which really sucks to see. But I'm going to have to get to some Winker. I mean, only $2,600 over on FanDuel. Pretty easy guy to plug and play, but obviously he's going to grab some ownership. Ty France has been great this year, though. Over 400 WOBA, 161 ISO, doesn't really strike out. Going to put the ball in play, and Jordan Lyles isn't a big strikeout guy anyway. Obviously, J-Rod's been fun. JP Crawford's been doing really well batting this year, batting close to 300. Not a ton of power in his bat, but he did go deep yesterday. And then after that, it gets a little bit worse. Eugenio Suarez is a strikeout machine, but he does have some pop in his bat if he can make contact. You have Adam Frazier, more of a contact guy than power, obviously. And then after Frazier, it's getting real tough to roster some of those guys.
See, I'm kind of interested in $2,100 Mikey Ford. I'm kind of interested in $2,000 on both sides, Taylor Trammell. I think he's a talented kid. Puts the ball in play, some power, some speed. So I could maybe get there on the 7, the 8 hitters a little bit more than that, but it's not the greatest bottom end. I'm with you on that. And I wouldn't get too overextended to it because like I said, Lyles has been pitching well enough in terms of limiting run creation, limiting power. So I think there's a little something to him and maybe limiting the Mariners, but I'll get there. On the other side, I'm targeting Mullins, Mancini, Santander, Hayes, maybe some Rutschman, definitely some Mountcastle. And then the bottom end is another one where it kind of weakens, but I do like Jorge Mateo for all his speed. If he can just manage to get on base at all, the guy dies on his on base percentage. A .251 on base percentage is the fastest guy in baseball, but he can't make his way to first base. I'll include him maybe here and there as a wraparound. I like him better when he's hitting like 6-7, so you can include him in the back end of stacks. Anybody I didn't mention from the Orioles there that you want to shout out just to pick up a little time?
No, I think you kind of mentioned it for the most part. I will say the bottom half of the order, their power numbers aren't as bad as maybe you would think. Like Mateo's at 140 for his ISO. Urias is 135. Odor's at 179. He took Robbie Ray deep yesterday, which was not something I was expecting. Some lefty on lefty crime. I wasn't expecting that. 3-run shot. Thought I was getting
I was expecting it out of one of the righty, Austin Hayes doing that. I would have been like, all right, that makes a lot of sense. I was kind of expecting that. Ruben Odor, I did not expect at all there. So yeah, maybe interesting against a limited righty like Flexen. You could throw him in 2,700, 6% ownership. I don't mind that. 2,300 at 3.7% owned on FanDuel. I don't mind that either, but probably not my overall favorite spot on the board. Let's take a look. Pods against the Brewers. Pods with a pretty good pitcher on the mound. Sean Manaea drawing a ton of ownership on DK, 54%. On FanDuel, he's got about half that, 25% for 10-2. Expensive price. Is he worth it against the Brewers here?
I think he's worth it in the sense that once we talk about some of these other pitchers coming up, you're going to really start liking Sean Manaea, I think, just because there's not that many great options here. And obviously we know he's got the upside of sub-4 implied run total against him here versus Milwaukee. 3.5 xFIP, 26.4% K rate. Did have that 112 strikeout game this year, which is a lot more upside than a lot of these guys have shown that we're going to talk about. So I just think from a vacancy standpoint on these pitchers, we're going to be playing a lot of Manaea, and I feel pretty good about it versus Milwaukee, even though they do have some guys that can hit lefties pretty well.
Yeah, that would be, one concern in there is some of those bats against lefties, but I do agree. I think you just, for lack of a lot of options, you do need to get there. And I tell you what, just looking at the overall numbers against left-handed pitching this year, Milwaukee's actually slipped significantly in terms of the WRC plus for the active roster. So I think there's maybe some more on the bone than we might even be thinking from Manaea. I just hate the ownership. Yeah. 25% on FanDuel. I'll probably be 18 to 20 and be happy with it. Just shave off a few shares to spread around. 50% on DK. I get it, but I'd probably, again, be looking to be more 40-ish% and just find a few shares to put to other weird things. As far as weird things go, would Hauser be on that list for you? 17% strikeout rate guy over 9 starts so far this season, going up against the Padres lineup that I personally don't think all that much of. I don't know that I'd get to Hauser here though. Would you?
Now, maybe just a little bit, just because, like I said, lack of good pitching options. But this isn't the craziest Padres lineup, obviously, without the T's. I just don't really like rostering Hauser too much. Never really been a huge fan. Did have that one really good year, but it just isn't striking out many guys. Sub 18%. The walk rate's close to double digits. Doesn't give up much power, though. I will give him that. But I'm not a big fan of Hauser.
Yeah, same. You're right. 1.49% home run rate this year, 2% last year, 17.5% strikeouts over 142 and a third last year, 17% over 46 and a third this year. I think we can safely say this is a guy who maybe will keep the ball in the park, maybe not get totally blown up by this weak Padres lineup, but probably not going to find all that many strikeouts. So yeah, very, very tempered expectations. And he's 9,100 on the FanDuel slate. I'm just not going there on FanDuel. At 85 on DK, I think you maybe get away with it. What about the Pods bats? Since we both agree that they're not that great, I'll always take Manny Machado. There's not really anybody else that I need to go out of my way for in that lineup. Maybe some shares of Hosmer at 2,800 on FanDuel I'd be all right with. Outside of that, I don't really like this lineup all that much at all. Are you getting to any stacks or are you getting to any one-offs from the Pods?
It might just be one-offs or mini stacks, and I'm probably not going to go my way to do it. But if they pop up in an optimizer, I'm not going to completely rule it out. Like the thing with Hauser is he's always had some pretty strong splits when it comes to lefties and righties. Always been pretty tough on righties, but lefties can't get to him. So Profar up top. Manny Machado, I don't care. I'll still play Machado. I'm not obviously scared of that because he's the best hitters in baseball. But Eric Hosmer, Jake Cronenworth, outside of that, it's just not a huge fan of the Padres.
Yeah, same here. I don't have much love for most of that lineup, and let alone like the back end of it. So not really going there all that much. On the Milwaukee side, a lot of righties that we do like going up against lefties, like a Mike Brasso to throw in there for some oddball power, some Tyrone Taylor in there for some of his premium contact. Christian Yelich, I'll take against anybody. Andrew McCutchen, obviously, and Luis Urias for me. But given their numbers, their performance in the overall against lefties this season, they've been 18% worse than average creating runs against lefties. They're not hitting for all that much power to speak of, and they're striking out at a fairly high clip. I might be getting to less Brewers here than I would have initially thought. Are you stacking these guys? Are you targeting that Manaea ownership on the other side?
Maybe just a little bit, but I'd much rather be on Manaea, like especially with no Hunter Renfroe. Like he was the guy that crushed lefties in this lineup. When you take him out of the equation, it definitely hurts a little bit. Like you have McCutchen up top, which people are going to play versus lefty, but he's also batting under 200 versus them this year. Just has some decent pop though, a 200 ISO, but man, it's not pretty. Obviously, there's some strikeout guys like 45% for Keston here if he's in the lineup. Brady Tellez at 30%. It's just not a lineup I'm getting a lot of love to.
Yeah. I'm surprised that I'm surprised that the numbers, and you're right. Hunter Renfroe coming off the active roster, there definitely is a part of that decrease in the overall, the WRC plus and everything against lefties and the power marks. But yeah, it's a more flawed version of that lineup. They're not all that expensive, which you do like. Might be a way to get to some of the pricier pitching options. But yeah, it's interesting. Not necessarily standing out for me either here. Let's move on. We've got the Cards with Matthew Liberatore on the mound, lefty, drawing a lot of ownership, 34% owned, 7,300 on DK, 11% owned for 8,000 on FanDuel. He's going up against a Chicago lineup that's been, somewhat frisky in spots this year. Not very good necessarily in Wrigley. They've got Keegan Thompson answering back on the mound, taking on this Cards lineup that's been dynamite against lefties, mid-level against righties, but improving against righties. Are you getting any Liberatore at that huge ownership mark?
Yeah, he's actually got less negative leverage than Sean Manaea, so that does give me some confidence. I mean, he's still going to be very high owned, but if I'm playing cash games, I'm probably just going Manaea and Liberatore here. And if I'm playing single entry, I'd probably be pretty tempted to do that and just rather get different bats. Because like we've been talking about, I mean, the pitching options aren't great, and we know he's got talent. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers so far this year, it's a very small sample size, but pull it up. I was looking at Chicago's lineup here. He's at sitting 4.8 xFIP, but it's a very small sample size, but 29% K rate, 11% walk rate. Hasn't been great in 9 innings, but I think the upside's there for him. I think his numbers will obviously get better as the season progresses. Under 4 implied run total for the Cubs, and we have a slight breeze blowing in, nothing too drastic, but maybe that helps him a little bit. And the Cubs are currently striking out around 24% of the time versus lefties, so I don't think he's a bad option at $7,300.
Yeah, I do like to throw arms at the Cubs on both sides in terms of the strikeout upside. What I'd be a little concerned about with a very young lefty, very inexperienced kid is the Cubs have been pretty decent against lefties this year in terms of run creation and power. 174 ISO is 10th, a 116 WRC plus, 16% better than average creating runs is 12th, 3.30% home run rate is 11th. So maybe it's a situation where we're just answering back with some Cubs bats. If we grab a share of Liberatore, we grab a half share of Cubs stacks. Maybe we do something like that where we're both sidesing it. For me, On FanDuel, I don't know that I'm going to get to a ton of Liberatore at 8,000. So I might be loading up some Cubs bats here, honestly, against him on the FanDuel slate because they're cheap. They're very low owned. They do have some power that I like with like an Ian Happ, a Patty Wisdom against any lefty I'll take. Morel's been frisky up top. So talk about that Cubs lineup and then just throw into the mixer if you're getting any shares of Keegan Thompson.
Yeah, I agree with you that with the Cubs. I think they're a pretty decent stack over on FanDuel because of their ownership. And I don't really want to get to too much Liberatore over on FanDuel. I'd much rather like him on DraftKings just because he slides in quite nicely as an SP2 on FanDuel. Definitely changes for me. But yeah, Morel up top, I think that's fine. Wilson Contreras obviously has plenty of power versus lefties. I think he went double dong just a couple nights ago. Patrick Wisdom, Frank Schwindel. Like, I don't think this is a bad spot to get to in tournaments. Obviously, I do prefer Liberatore, especially over on DraftKings, but I don't think we should completely ignore the Cubs here. So yeah, I can get with you on that.
I like it. I think that's an interesting spot for a little bit of pop. What about the Cards on the other side? Are you grabbing any shares of Keegan Thompson going up against the Cardinals for 6,100 on DK, 77 on FanDuel?
I think on DraftKings is the only place I'd want to get the Keegan Thompson just because of how cheap he is, and the Cardinals are a team I much prefer versus lefties. Obviously, Keegan Thompson isn't amazing, but in 40 innings this year, numbers aren't terrible. 22.7% K rate, 3.75 xFlip, and only a 109 ISO given up, and not really walking too many guys. So I think it's terrible. I think $6,100. I mean, he's going to get lower ownership than Liberatore, so it's a decent pivot if you're playing a single tournament.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting SP2 pivot. We've seen, like you said, Thompson, not a very distinguished pitcher, but we've seen him have at least one very good MLB, very good DFS start this year that I've seen and that I remember. And I think at that price, only less than 10% ownership, it is a tough lineup on the other side, but they're not as good against righties. We have the question of Nolan Gorman, whether he'll be in the lineup as a lefty up there. Tommy Edman hits from both sides of the plate, but they're prime bats. Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, both righties, both perform better against lefties. I think you can maybe get away with something, but I would definitely hedge with a bunch of card stacks here as well. I'm pretty much always getting the cards, particularly when they're all owned in the single digits on the FanDuel slate. That is very low ownership on FanDuel. DK, they're pulling a little bit more ownership, but I think they're perfectly playable over there. Do you have a favorite bat from the cards to shout out?
If we can get Gorman in the lineup, I like that $2,600 price point, pretty much just from a value standpoint. Obviously, you'd always like Goldschmidt or Arenado, but I do prefer them versus lefties. So I think Nolan Gorman for the value would be pretty good.
Yeah, and continuing to just mash the ball. He was murdering it in AAA, 52.4% hard hit and 19% barrels in his 36 plate appearances in the show. 2 home runs already at 290 ISO. If he's in the lineup, absolutely fire away with both barrels. Love Nolan Gorman here. Anything else on this one, or should we move on, take care of a quick little piece of business?
No, this should be a fun game because, I mean, if the pitchers fail or if Liberatore fails, I mean, there's going to be a lot of busted lineups on DraftKings tonight. So it should be a fun one.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a key inflection point for the slate. Should be a good one. All right, so right now, guys, is the time to check out our best bets package. Like right now, maybe after the show, maybe a little bit more towards lock and time when the games start. But we've got the best bets package going on. If you click the link below, you can subscribe as our team of experts use Awesemo's industry-leading projection models to identify the best bets available in the NBA, MLB, and more each day. We're confident that these bets will be worth more than the price of admission. So click that link below, start betting today. If you want a free preview of our best bets, follow our @Awesemo Best Bets Twitter handle and turn on notifications. We post a free premium best bet every single day. We're just giving away picks to get money, guys. So subscribe to that on Twitter. Make sure you're following that. Subscribe to our best bets package. It's not all that expensive, and we have people just murdering their prop picks, their bets. It's Ben, it's Alex, it's Steve Buzzard providing their top bets of the day. You're talking about leading experts in the industry using our models from the site. You can't beat this if you're a sports bettor, guys. So I encourage everybody to jump on that. We've got a whole Discord channel set up just dedicated to that, people on that package. It's a really, really good offer. So check that out. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, help us out there. We've got 2 more games to talk about. We're a little bit over time already, but that's okay. We've got the Braves with Ian Anderson on the hill in Coors Field, taking on the Rockies with Austin Gomber on the mound. Any Coors Field pitching for you today?
I think I was just looking at the top pitchers too. And I mean, just on the surface looking at it, it's like, I don't want to play these guys, but I was looking at Ian Anderson. I think he's pulling in 1% ownership. Obviously that might come up throughout the day, but if he's going to be 1% owned, I mean, we have him as a 12% chance to be a top 2 pitcher, 10.5% leverage. I mean, yeah, I'll take some at $7,100 as a pivot off of Liberatore. I'm not going to play 100% Liberatore. So in the lineups I don't get to them, it's only a $200 less pivot. So I definitely try to get to some Anderson versus the Rockies. But as far as Austin Gomber goes, that'll probably be a pass for me. Even though the Braves do strike out a lot versus lefties, I just don't think he's going to have a good time tonight.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wish he'd struck out maybe a few more. Like if he was around that 23% rate that we saw from him last year, maybe I'm getting a little bit more out of him. Does tend to keep the ball down somewhat effectively. 3.06% home run rate, a 9.2-degree average launch angle this year. Last year it was a 4.1% home run rate, but only 33.5% hard hit. There's maybe a little something there at 59 for Gomber with all those strikeouts. So at 1.8% ownership at 5,900, I might have to take a few shares. I don't love it, but price wise and just with that lack of unpopular value on the slate, I do think that's maybe one source where you can grab it. I think Ian Anderson is the better pitcher. I would definitely be more inclined to grab him, but he's 7,100 compared to 5,900. So it's just interesting in terms of the offset. I don't think I need to get to either of these pitchers on the FanDuel slate. I only think they're, kind of relevant for those discount prices on DK where you need that SP2. What about the bats? The Braves are absurdly popular on both sides, 30-ish% ownership on both sides. It's the Atlanta Braves and all their power in Coors Field. I get it, but I think I'm looking to come in well under the field. It's kind of what I typically do with the visiting team at Coors when they're this highly owned. Are you getting to Brave stacks? Do you see any way to roster these guys in like unique configurations?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get some Brave stacks. I mean, you're kind of nuts if you completely fade them. I don't mind being underweight on the field, obviously. I mean, because we have them at 30% projected ownership right now, and they're not even that crazily under leveraged. Like it's only about -4.5%, -5% right now, which isn't too bad for a team that's got 30% ownership. So that is something to keep in mind. If you want to get different, though, you're going to have to leave off a guy like Acuna. You're going to probably have to leave off probably an Ozzie or Swanson up top. But the bottom half of this order, I feel fine stacking them up. If you want to start with Austin Riley, then Olsen, Darno, Contreras, Duvall. I got no problem with that. I think Matt Olson's one of the better tournament plays on the entire slate because people don't want to do lefty on lefty, which I get. He's probably going to be hitting lower in the order, but Olsen can hit lefties just fine over the course of his career. So there's ways to get different, but you're still eating a lot of ownership just about wherever you go.
Yeah, and that's the thing on the DK slate, like even all those lower owned options still into the 20s. So it's a little challenging. You do get a little offset around like the catchers on FanDuel. Olsen only 11% right now on FanDuel. That's going to go up, I think, by the time this slate rolls around. I expect him to be around 20%. But I do agree, the back end easier to roster here. Maybe a sneaky Adam Duvall coming back to life down the bottom. Maybe if you got Mikey Harris down there, you grab him. What about the Rockies on the other side? As usual, far less ownership going up against a pitcher who profiles somewhat similar to their pitcher. I mean, only a 17% contact rate, plenty of walks on the board for Ian Anderson, a 4.50 xFIP. He's somewhat targetable too, and nobody's really doing it with this Rockies team. That tends to be where I go at Coors Field. When they're low owned, I'll go to the Rockies side of the equation. Are you with me on that? Are you getting any Rockies at under 10% ownership?
Yeah, I know I mentioned I like some Anderson, but that's just because he's 1% owned. I think it's more likely that he doesn't have a great day and then he ends up having a good day. Like his numbers are worse than Austin Gomber in some fashions. I mean, 4.5 xFIP compared to 3.9 for Austin Gomber, similar strikeout rates. And he walks more guys, 11% walk rate, which can get guys in trouble. I mean, you put a guy or two on base and you give up a 2 or 3 run shots, a lot different than a solo shot. So I don't think these Rockies are completely out of the equation. Like I said, you're getting lower ownership on these guys. So Charlie Blackmon, Dawes up top. CJ Cron's mashing this year. Ryan McMahon potentially batting cleanup. Connor Joe, lower in the order these days, batting fifth. But this isn't a lineup I'm going to stay away from. I think we're going to get some decent leverage on them compared to the Braves. And obviously we're still similar hitting conditions. And Ian Anderson's just about been the same as Austin Gomber. So.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's a good spot to look at and potentially, an interesting leverage spot against the field there. Wish Anderson was maybe getting more ownership, but you can't have everything in it's a Coors game. So I get why he's not. Anything else to call out from this one before we move on to the last game of the day?
No, it should be an offensive explosion, but keep in mind in tournaments, it always pays to be underweight on really chalky spots like this.
Yep. That's generally my approach to Coors Field. Like I said, with the over-owned visiting team, most in particular. So the last game on deck, interesting one with the Mets going into LA to play the Dodgers. Mets opening the series with Taijuan Walker on the mound. Dodgers answering back with Tony Gonsolin. I think I would be in a heads-up matchup much more in favor of Tony Gonsolin. We do have other options to spread around on the board, though. So he's only drawing 14% ownership on DK, 9,100. On FanDuel, 9,800, only 2% ownership. That's kind of interesting. I think that could be maybe sneaky, but I do think the Mets are a good lineup. Taijuan Walker, not drawing any ownership on either site really to speak of. Low priced. If you want him, you can have him as far as I'm concerned. What do you think about let's start with Gonsolin, who I think is the more interesting pitcher to discuss. What are you doing with Gonsolin here?
Yeah, Gonsolin's got some of the best leverage scores on the top pitchers tool for DraftKings, and I think that's fine. Does he have some walk issues? Sure, but he also has a 25% K rate and a 3.5 xFIP. And while he's not usually a pitcher I roster too much just because of some of the issues that he has, it's a slate where there's not many great pitching options. So if you want to get away from Shamanaya, I think Tony Gonsolin is kind of your direct pivot there. It's not a great matchup versus the Mets. They have plenty of great bats, but at the same time, I think there's some decent win equity for Tony Gonsolin as long as he can go those 5+ innings. And there's definitely strikeouts to be had for him. He doesn't give it much power. Obviously, not a lot of homers give it up, and good ground ball rate. So I think Gonsolin's a fine play, $9,100. And over on FanDuel, yeah, he's $9,800, but again, he's just kind of like that direct pivot off of Shamanaya on both sides.
Yeah. And I think getting to him at less price than the other top end pitchers at 2% ownership, that's a potential boon to your lineups there. So I'm going to be doing that, even though it's more than I'd like to pay for Tony Gonsolin in a vacuum. I think just given the dynamics of this slate, he does make sense at that price and that ownership. So I'll be grabbing some shares of him. Do you get to any shares of Taijuan Walker at 7,700 on DK? I think he's useless at 83 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I'm not planning on playing any Taijuan Walker. I'm usually just a fan of stacking the Dodgers, which I know is not a crazy hot take. I'd try to stack the Dodgers.
You madman.
I'd stack the Dodgers any slate, but I mean, just to kind of talk about the Dodgers bats because I'm not going to be rostering. Yeah, I mean, Walker's got a 13% K rate this year. Like, yeah, some of his other numbers as far as hard contact and power goes aren't bad, but this is basically the NL All-Star lineup. Like, I'll just take all the Dodgers, and you're going to get them lower owned than the Braves and, Coors Field. So, I mean, Dodgers are definitely looking pretty good because it's not too often you can get them as not one of the highest owned stacks in the entire slate. Yes, they're going to still have ownership, but as of right now, I believe they're coming in under obviously the Braves, under the Mariners, Rockies, and the Orioles. So, I mean, that's pretty good ownership for a Dodger stack.
Yeah, getting to one of the best lineups in all of baseball, under-owned compared to all those teams. Yes, please sign me up. Yeah. And I talk about it all the time. We've got the high ownership numbers today, or the high point is Trey Turner at 14% on the FanDuel slate. Everybody on DK is the top end 11%, 10% for Mookie, Turner, and Will Smith. Everybody else in single digits. So we're not dealing with very much popularity. And then the aspect of this team that I always talk about is the bottom 4 hitters in this team are essentially the top 4 for a lot of other teams. They're all coming in. Justin Turner, Cody Bellinger, Chris Taylor, Gavin Lux are all coming in under 2% owned on the DK slate. Everybody's under 5,000. I think that's a great spot to go to here. You can mix in Edwin Rios, who's been mashing the ball. He's only 4.4% owned, only 3,900 still on the DK slate. Sign me up for some Dodgers here against Taijuan Walker. What about the Mets on the other side? Nimmo, spectacular leadoff man, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, Nicholas Plummer showing a little bit of interesting output for DFS slates recently for the Mets. Are you getting any Mets going against Gonsolin here?
Not going to be a lot of them. Maybe I get a couple one-offs. I mean, if I had to get anybody, it's probably going to be Nimmo up top at $4,400. I just love playing Brandon Nimmo. I think we talked about that last time. We were talking about the Mets. We did a show together. But I prefer some of these guys a lot better versus lefties like Starling Marte, Pete Alonso. So maybe some one-offs, but I'd much rather be on the Gonsolin side.
I think I'm with you on the analysis of the matchup and everything. I do think that if I go, let's say 5x the field, right? He's 2% on, let's call him 3% on FanDuel. So if I get to like 15% Tony Gonsolin, I'm 5x the field on FanDuel. I do think I want to grab some hedge stacks, and I don't have to go crazy overweight to it to offset that ownership on Gonsolin. So I'd probably have a little bit more Mets than the field, because on the FanDuel slate, everybody is in like the 1% range, the 2% range. So it's really easy to get ahead of the field while not overexposing yourself and still rostering Gonsolin. So I think I'd do it that way, but I agree that it's not the greatest spot for them. I agree. I would rather have some of those prime bats against a lefty. Everything you said is dead on. I just think from the game theory dynamics of it, maybe you grab a few additional ones on the FanDuel slate. On DK, you probably don't need it because they're a little bit prohibitively expensive to get to the pitching that we want over there. So I think that makes sense. That brings us to the end. Wow. It's felt like a short show today. We went like an hour, 10, hour 15, something like that, but it feels short compared to a 2-hour show yesterday. So guys, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. We really appreciate everybody hanging out with us. Subscribing helps you keep up with all our offers, our giveaways, all that stuff every time we go live. Liking it helps us out. We've got content all day long. We've got the MMA strategy show coming up later on with Jason Floyd and Pete the Heat Rogers. That's at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., 6 o'clock. I'll be back with Gundacker to talk through the main slate of baseball again. 7 o'clock, we've got Lofty, and I think Alex is taking that spot. We've got Josh out, so somebody's going to be jumping into that spot for the NBA deeper dive. Then we've got Greg and Eric for NBA Live before locking into the first half hour of that basketball game. So stick around, tune in for all those shows, guys. We really appreciate it. We're out of here.